just the most interesting people are doing the most interesting things.
Right. So cherish your time here as the first ones and early adopters of Italia.
Absolutely. And the community, I would say also, because it's smaller, it's more intimate, the opportunity that you get to build a community is just at a different level.
Mm-hmm. Great, Naval. Someone asked me what should be the title of our conversation, and I read a really cool quote from you that says, the democratization of technology allows anyone to be a creator, entrepreneur, and scientist. The future is brighter. I like the tagline, the future is brighter. Why would a smart person disagree with that before you expand on why the future is brighter?
Well, I think smart people are very good at imagining downside scenarios. They're very good at imagining all the ways that things can go wrong. And that's not just smart people, that's everybody. We're hardwired that way as humans, because if you don't imagine the downside scenarios, the outcome can be catastrophic. But we are living in a time when there's an enormous amount of innovation going on. That's because we went through an era called the Enlightenment era. And since then, we've discovered science, we've discovered how to correct errors and how to get smarter. And it just takes one person to make a breakthrough for all of humanity. One person who discovers an anti-aging solution, one person who discovers relativity, one person who invents the steam engine. And that then goes out to everybody. And human creativity is fundamentally unlimited. And so I think that the future is bright. We should be optimistic, because now that we have discovered how to, through free thinking and free speech, correct errors and make new discoveries and spread them to other people and then automate them through technology, that life should be getting better and better. And it's easy to imagine downside risks, but it's impossible by definition to imagine what the good stuff is that's going to happen next. Yes, you can make general predictions like singularity or whatever, but those aren't really that helpful other than spreading the optimism meme. Because if we could predict what the next thing was, and if we could predict it completely accurately, then we would have already invented it. And that's just not how it works. These things take time, they take ingenuity, they take free thinking, they take freedom to create, to earn, and to distribute. And so I think people are here because it's free. Prospera is free. That's why you are here. If Prospera was incredibly restrictive in what you could say and what you could do, then you wouldn't be here. This would be the wrong place to be. So it is that freedom, as Matt Ridley says, something like, freedom is the parent of innovation. Prosperity is the child of freedom and the parent of prosperity. I think that's what he said. And I think that's absolutely accurate. So I think we should be optimistic as long as we are free to create and free to discuss and free to distribute these learnings.
It seems to be that we as entrepreneurs, technologists, thinkers, there's kind of a presumption against innovation because we fear the downside, which is why in this industry that we're in, there's so many regulations around healthcare, which is making it harder for us to innovate. So what's kind of the mechanism that can unlock that energy besides being in a free place? Or is there
unfortunately, the regulators do a lot more harm these days because they can't tolerate any downside risk. So they're completely binary. You're not allowed to hurt anybody or kill anybody under any circumstances, but yet billions of people die of old age and hundreds of millions of people die of cancer and all these missing therapies that don't get to exist. The FAA essentially drove the drone business out of the United States by not letting drones fly. So now all the drones are made in China. Congratulations. That'll probably cost us Taiwan longer term. The SEC basically limits all investment so people can't earn. So they have to put into T-bills and stocks and they can't go into private investments, and the private sector gets starved for venture capital. As a proportion, venture capital and innovation capital is still just a minuscule percentage of the economy. And the same way, the FDA basically says, no, you can't do any harm whatsoever, so you can't take any risk. You can't experiment with nuclear power plants because God forbid something goes wrong, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So because these regulators can't do any cost-benefit trade-off, they always only restrict. And it is easier to restrict people. It is easier to stop people than to let them create things. So it's just very unfortunate, the whole system that's been set up. Now, how do we kind of break past that, especially in the medical domain? Well, I think you can obviously try to work through the system, and that requires $1 billion in pharmaceutical trials and people are doing it. And it requires kind of going after politically protected things like, okay, here's a cancer gene therapy for a certain protected class, and it makes us all look good if it works out, or you try it on dogs. But the reality is the rest of the world is not going to just sit around and die just because a few regulators and a few developed world economies are intent on protecting the retirement home they've built for everybody. Because that's sometimes what it feels like, right? It's like a giant retirement home. We're all just going to party and eat and drink until we die. And that's just not how the young people want to live. So you're seeing places coming up around the world. It's not just Prospera, but there are other places where people are looking towards the future. And they say, well, look, we do want to live longer and we do want to live healthier. We've increased lifespan, but not necessarily in the best way. A lot of it just came from getting rid of infant mortality. And then the remaining few decade or two that we've added are tacked on to the end. It's the shitty part, right? It's like, okay, I'm in an old folks home for 20 years longer. That's not how you want to live. You want to live with vitality. And so the promise of that is so strong that now if we can start to have breakthrough therapies, like I know Minicircle is doing some interesting things down here. There are new things happening with peptides. There are new things happening with anti-aging, and the GLP-1 agonist, for example, I think will end obesity in Western countries. That's going to be a huge game changer. People are going to wake up and say, wait a minute, you mean I could have taken a magic pill all along and dialed in my exact weight or my muscular structure, or perhaps even other kinds of therapies that people are talking about that might make me smarter or extend my lifespan by 30%. I think those kinds of things are going to be incredible eye-openers. And medical tourism is making a little bit of this viable, where people are now traveling around and getting things done. But I just see that the genie's bursting out of the lamp, right? People are just going to say, if you want to die, go ahead, but I'm not going to. I'm not making that choice.
Let's talk a bit about AI, artificial intelligence. Seems like that is a next wave of like the digital frontier. The internet opened a digital frontier. What's the case for AI helping us really break into the physical frontier more, like in medical?
AI to me is an incredibly useful tool. It's not going to replace us anytime soon because these AIs are not AGIs. They're not universal explainers. There's some hypothesis and scaremongering that they're going to automatically turn into AGIs just if we add more compute. I don't think that's the case. I don't think we have a theory for AGI yet. We don't understand how it would work. We don't yet understand how creativity and true intelligence works, but there's a level of creativity that these AIs can help us with, which is recombining facts. And what they really are is they're natural language computers. So for the first time, instead of us having to learn the language of the computer and program in C or Python or assembly and structure everything very, very carefully, the computers learn our language. They learn English, they learn Spanish, they talk to us, and we can converse back and forth with them. That right there is a massive breakthrough. They're also fundamentally translation engines, but what they can translate is a lot, not just languages, not just putting speech to text, but also things like translating from what the road looks like to how a car should drive it, to translating from coding from one language to another. So I consider AI to be, it's like what calculation and computers did for calculation for mathematicians and for people, for engineers and for people writing code and building structures and building machines. AI will now allow us to do that for the natural language. So it will allow us to do that for all the other domains that were sort of left out. And computers now become much less esoteric, something that only programmers can access and everybody else has to consume their output. So everybody else can now communicate with computers directly and more naturally. Even such simple things as the keyboard, the typing, right? That's an anachronism. That's an invention that came after the printing press. Then we had typewriters, then we had keyboards. But once you have perfect speech to text, keyboards are going to go away. It's like Star Trek. Star Trek, they don't sit there, typing everything into the keyboard. No, they talk to the computer. The computer talks back to them, except for Ursula, who's there pressing some random buttons just to remind people that it's a computer. So I think we're headed towards an age of ubiquitous natural language computing, where the entire internet and all of its recombinations are at your fingertips. AIs are helping you with driving, with coding, with translation, with transcription, breaking down barriers. And there's more things that they will do. It'll be really interesting when it enters the field of robotics. You can now see that robots are making huge jumps instead of having to be programmed for very specific actions. I think it's like Moravec's paradox, that like simple things like a toddler walking around, really hard to do with robots, but complex things like manipulating drugs is really easy. Well, now that's changing thanks to AI. I think transformers will bring self-driving everywhere. Waymo is already working really well in California. You're going to see Tesla with its camera solutions within the next few years combined with transformers figure it out. So self-driving, 99% self-driving will come. And it's going to change our lives in incredible ways. Imagine, if you walk into a modern city, 1/3 to 1/5 of the space is taken up in parking garages and parking spots. That disappears in a self-driving world. Self-driving cars can packet switch on the road. They can just occupy one lane. And then cities suddenly become walking paradises. How does that change our world? What if you wake up in the morning, you get into your living room, and it's actually an RV, and the door closes and it undocks from your house and it drives to the next RV, docks, and there's your meeting. It's just driving around. You don't even know where you're going next. It's just connecting to your friends. Real estate and cars become one thing, right? So there's just that alone, just that unlock alone will change society as we know it. So I think we're starting to go through another wave of innovation and change. And I hope to see the same thing in biotech. Where biotech really suffers is it's not an explanatory science. It's a rule of thumb based science. We just try lots and lots of things and you kind of don't really know underneath how they work. There's a few explanatory theories in biology like evolution and the germ theory of disease, but mostly it's just like, well, this works as the mTOR pathway. Well, why the mTOR pathway? Because there's the FOXO gene. Well, why the FOXO gene? Well, there's like this, there's this other thing. And it's just like complex names being explained in terms of complex names being explained in terms of complex names, right? And then maybe there's a cycle underneath that we sort of understand. But when you go to a doctor just has a whole bunch of rules of thumb that they memorize from 20 years ago, and their thinking has not been updated. So I think we need to develop much better explanatory theories in biology. That requires innovation, that requires risk-taking, that requires experimentation, both in AI models as well as in real life. We need to have the right to try, the right to take informed risk with consent, especially for desperate populations that are dying. They shouldn't have to go beg the FDA. And by the way, we're all dying, every single one of us. Every single day we get a little older and, it gets a little worse. Let me tell you, I'm on the other side of that hill and it's not pleasant. It's all downhill from here. So let's turn that around.
Yeah, it's kind of in a way, yes, applause.
I am literally preaching to the choir.